Hey everybody, welcome back to Lowcountry Stories and Guest. Today we have a very special treat. I got my man, Dr. Eben Upton, and he is the founder of a little revolution we like to call Raspberry Pi, which has changed everything for a lot of people. Let's go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name's Eben, and for the last decade I've been doing, as you say, Raspberry Pi. This little thing that started off being, well, we hope to sell 1,000 of them. We're 34.5 million units in now. And it's been, we haven't slowed down in 10 years, it feels like.
Okay, so if I was just the average civilian with, very little tech background, how would you describe the Raspberry Pi to me?
Well, it's a credit card sized computer. You plug it into here it is. It's a credit card sized little circuit board. You plug it into your television. You plug a mouse and a keyboard into it, and a USB power supply like you'd use for a mobile phone. And it's a PC. You turn it on. It gives you a Windows system, gives you a web browser. But the interesting thing about it is we designed it so kids of all ages, 8 to 80, can use it to learn to program. We bundle onto it every tool from Scratch from MIT, which is a graphical programming language for kids, all the way up to C, Python, professional programming languages. That's what it is. It's a PC, and it's relatively low cost. I think that's the other thing to say about it. Our cheapest one's $5. We call this our latte. The Raspberry Pi Zero. We call it our little latte computer. Sometimes I won't have a latte. I'll have a Unix workstation. Our flagship price point's always been $35. We sold a series of different machines of increasing levels of performance at that price point, but right now $35 buys you a quad core processor, 1.5 gigahertz processor, wireless gigabit Ethernet, and 2 gigabytes of RAM. So a really useful desktop computer.
I tell you what, it's really an amazing thing how when this first came out. I remember when you were on the Raspberry One. Mm-hmm. And we got word of it here in the States, and I missed out. I mean, they were sold out before I could get one. I mean, I was just like, whoa. Yeah. I thought it was like every other consumer item, but I'd have just forever and ever to go ahead and buy one. I should have been at the door for my money.
Yeah, it was weird. So we launched on the 29th of February 2012. So it's kind of weird that we launched on a leap day. And yeah, like you say, we kind of said the day before to people in the UK, get up, set your alarm clocks. To people in the US, stay up a little bit late. We sold 100,000 on that. We had 2,000 units, and we sold 100,000 orders on the first day. So we spent 6 months really making the units to supply the people who ordered in the first few hours. It was incredible. This incredible, wonderful experience that people were interested in what we'd done, but also terrifying to have that kind of level of oversubscription.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, right.
But I hadn't seen anything like that since Windows 95 came out.
When
Windows 95 came out, there were people outside the stores lined up, and I hadn't seen a rush on anything like that since, except for when Raspberry came out. And of course, we were kind of getting away from retail in-your-face stores and more to everything being online, of course, and that sort of thing. But I mean, really, and to me, it's captured that first fascination that me, for one, that I first had with computing. And we all chase it. We all chase after that first spark we had. Yeah. And you guys have done a good job capturing that. You really have.
Yeah, we had these machines. I mean, I had back in the 1980s, I had a machine called a BBC microcomputer, which was one of these 8-bit computers. You turn it on, it boots into BASIC, and you can, you get that very immediate, experience of being confronted with programming. And if you don't want to program a BBC Micro, the first thing you have to do is type a little bit of code to load something from a disk, or load something from a tape, or start a word processor from a ROM or something. But it meant that kind of everyone in my generation had that kind of that immediate experience. And we used to go into a store and type that the basic program 10 print I am the best, 20 go to 10, or 10 print something a lot filthier than that.
Right.
And then you type that in, and then you hit enter on all the machines, and then you run out the door. And then you watch the staff. You stand there at the window. You watch the staff trying to turn the machines off and trying to reset the machine. And it's great, right? Because for me that turned into a lifetime of hacking and building things. For a lot of people, that's all they did. But it meant that everybody who was like me, everybody who might have a passion for it, had a chance to discover that. And that's what we lost. It's great that modern computers are user friendly. But because it means a lot more people can use them and get value out of them. But what we lost was that sort of free element of discovery for people who were going to be the next generation of hackers and coders.
Well, a lot of people probably be interested to know too about all the customizable things you could do with a Raspberry. I mean, we could have a whole show for 2 hours, nothing but different modifications and applications you could use a Raspberry for. Why don't you give us a couple of examples?
Well, the nice thing about Raspberry Pi, when I talk about it, I'm a software engineer, so I talk about it as a computer. I talk about it as a thing you write software for. Right. But what we have along the top of the board is we have these 2 rows of pins that are general purpose I/O pins that you can use to interact with the real world. This little connector, it's kind of near the camera for you. And what people use, as you say, what people use that for is what we call physical computing. So computing in the real world. You get people building robots. You get people building weather stations. You get people controlling factories. We sell a lot of these now into industrial applications. So you get people controlling factory equipment. We have people send them up under weather balloons and take pictures from the edge of space because we've got a camera connector on there. There was a guy in Japan built a machine for sorting cucumbers. He had his parents were running a cucumber farm and they were getting a little bit old and they didn't like, Japanese cucumbers. They like to sort them into a lot of different varieties based on how big they are, how green they are, how many little knobbles they got on them. And so he built he used a camera and a machine learning application to learn about what the cucumbers look like and then push them little flippers to kind of push them off a conveyor belt into different buckets. Right.
Gotcha.
So people, it's like, one of the reasons why Raspberry Pi has been successful, I think, is that it's unlocked this world of, people have had, there's latent demand for the product. People have had latent ideas for things they want to build. And this has kind of been a piece of glue, a piece of Lego that connects together networking, computing, the real world, cameras, to let people realize these ideas they really already had that were just in their heads. They had no way to build them.
Well, the first attraction we had, myself and my friends, this was way back, and we still are, I guess, into survivalism and whatnot. And you wouldn't think that survivalism and computing could go so closely together, and it couldn't before the Raspberry Pi, to be very honest. Reason being, you're running off a very limited amount of power.
Yeah.
And we were like, golly, what are we going to find that we can run on our solar panels in our little retreat somewhere, which is essentially like fancy camping. And, what could fit that bill? Well, here comes the Raspberry Pi. Runs at 75% less power than the average PC.
Yeah.
Boom. Fit the bill. Been in love ever since.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And what we tried to do is we tried to deliver over the years an increasing level of performance, a more PC-like level of performance, while keeping in that same sort of footprint. That same sort of obviously the same physical footprint, but also the same power footprint. So there's a lot of effort that's gone in over the years to optimizing the power consumption of the device while pushing the performance up.
I bet the price point's a real challenge for you guys. Golly.
Yeah, man. We're imprisoned by that 35. So, where did the price come from? The price came because we were trying to reach children. What we thought we could do if we could make a computer that costs the same as a school textbook, then that'd be a reasonable thing to ask parents to buy. Most schools in the UK, don't know what it's like in the US. Most schools in the UK often ask the children to make a contribution towards the textbooks. They probably shouldn't, right? I mean, we pay our taxes. So you probably shouldn't, but in the end, that's how it works. So we thought if we can make one cost the same as a school textbook, then, we'd have a chance. And so we end up kind of, so many years later, you think we're delivering that first Raspberry Pi, a single core, 700 megahertz, quarter of a gigabyte of RAM. and now we're delivering about 40 times the performance. We're delivering exactly 8 times as much memory, 2 gigabytes
A lot
instead.
more features.
Wireless, Bluetooth, gigabit Ethernet, USB 3. And of course, that's kind of over time, the pressure that's even with, obviously, Moore's Law.
I know wireless drove it up.
Yeah, wireless is, it's probably the most expensive element on the device outside the memory and the processor. It's the most expensive element on the device. And it's the only kind of genuinely new thing we've added. Everything else has been like a quantitative increase, more RAM, more processing power. Wireless is the only thing where we've added a feature which just was not there on the original device. And Moore's Law gives you some benefit over time. RAM gets cheaper, processors get cheaper, processors get faster, but fundamentally, sooner or later, you are running up against the fact that you are packing vastly more into the device, and that puts the business model under a lot of pressure.
I got you. Well, a lot of our listeners might not be very familiar with open source operating systems like Linux. What made you guys go with Debian?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, originally it wasn't as obvious as it looks. So yeah, we've been a big Debian supporter for a long time. Originally, the very first demos we ever did ran Ubuntu. Actually, we're running obviously Debian derived, but I was running Ubuntu 9, I think, because that's what we had. That was the image we had when we first started building it. They were available online. We went through a period of thinking we were probably going to use Fedora. But that didn't really work out for us. And then we ended up, the original Raspberry Pis have a slightly interesting architectural decision. We use a processor called ARM11, which is, so you kind of got generations. So ARM unhelpfully have kind of 2 different numbering schemes. They have a kind of numbering of generations, and then they have numbering of cores. And so your ARM11 core is an ARM v6 core, so it's a version 6 of the ARM architecture. And the weird thing is that you have kind of the ARM architectures that received a lot of attention were version 5 and version 7. And version 6 didn't get a lot of attention. So you could get a Debian for version 5 and one for version 7. So and obviously the version 7 one wouldn't work. The version 5 one would work, but it wasn't optimized to the specific features of v6. So in the end, what happened was a couple of guys, Mike Thompson and Peter Green, put together a special version of Debian that they called Raspbian. That's particularly tuned. It's effectively, you take the V7 version, you take out the small number of features that are V7 specific, and you end up with something which is more optimal than the V5 version. And so that's what we ended up with. And it was for a long time, it was the only properly V6 optimized operating system choice for us. It's been fantastic, of course, because what you've got is tens of thousands of packages. You have all of the fruit of, half a century now. Of open source, the GNU userland, about half a century of effort in producing, open high performance software. It's the thing that's made Raspberry Pi possible. We could just about build the hardware platform, but without a ready-made, high-performance, stable software platform like Debian, there's no way that a little group of people like us could ever have delivered something that was a legitimate PC competitor.
Well, it does certainly offer a good substitute for a desktop, in just about every regard. I can't say enough good things about that. Maybe a stumbling block for some people be, of course, the operating system, the learning curve possibly, but Raspbian really, I don't see how I could get any more simple, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, a big trend, trend that's happened that's been helpful to us as we've been pushing our performance up is that the kind of Windows premium has become less important. So, at the start when we were in 2012, people were like, why doesn't it run Windows? And what's happened over the last 8 years is more and more people are using Office 365 or they're using
cloud-based.
Google Docs. They're using cloud-based Office applications, and that means as long as you've got a platform that runs a web browser well, then you're in much better shape for as a desktop replacement.
I know my wife's a big Chromebook person.
Yeah,
Man.
yeah. Horses for courses, right? There's a whole thing with us where, we always love it when people deploy Raspberry Pis in education because they're one of the few surviving platforms. Obviously, Chromebooks really aren't that. They're one of the few surviving platforms which are genuinely programmable. And it's always sad to see schools in particular deploying non-general purpose hardware, whether that's tablets or Chromebooks to kids.
Very much agreed. So the original vision was with students in mind. Would you expand on that a little bit? Because we got a lot of educators in the audience.
Yeah. Well, I got into programming because I had my BBC Micro. I was a real geek, big geek, and the idea. But what was the genesis of the Raspberry Pi idea? We're in Cambridge in the UK. We've got one of the best universities in the world. It's a university that's very involved in the development of computing. It's Alan Turing's university. What we were finding a decade ago was we were struggling to persuade enough young people to apply to study computer science, which is incredible, right? Because if that's happening to Cambridge, it must be happening doubly, trebly to other institutions. And so we were looking around saying, well, what's happened? Why? Well, A, why don't we have any kids? But B, why did we used to have kids? And really the idea we settled on was like, I didn't learn computing at school in a classroom setting with a teacher in front of me. I learned computing after school in the computer lab or at break time in the computer lab with a machine that just sat there and didn't teach me to program. It just allowed me to learn. And so really what Raspberry Pi is, those machines disappeared. They were replaced in kids' bedrooms. The computer that you buy to play games on that was a general purpose computer, Commodore 64, Trash 80, was replaced by, anyway, see, I localize it depends on my audience, So I know the words. And the C64 was a big deal in the UK as well. Trash 80 a little bit less. Those machines were replaced by your Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo. Yeah. Those machines. Then obviously in other scenarios, they were replaced over time by tablets, Chromebooks, set-top boxes, mobile phones, all of these machines that are enormously powerful. They're vastly powerful compared to my BBC Micro, but they're not programmable. And so really the thought was, okay, there were machines and we had students. The machines went away, the students went away. If we bring the machines back, maybe the students will come back.
Makes
kind
sense
of
to
cargo
me.
cult kind of thing, right?
Right.
And it worked. We built the cargo cult BBC Micro, and the cargo came, and we now have. So we went from Cambridge. We went from 600 students applying for our places in 1999 in the dot-com boom down to 200 in 2008. Real very steep collapse. But we're up to 1,400. I was just talking today I used to interview, and it was depressing because I used to interview students. It was depressing because we only had, 6 applicants to our college. I was talking today to the chap who succeeded me as director of studies, succeeded me in that interviewing role. He said he had between 50 and 60 applicants last year. And that's not all Raspberry Pi. There have been a lot of other initiatives that have happened in this area in the last 10 years. But I think, you ask the kids, hey, how did you get into computing? They all say Raspberry Pi, and they all say robotics. And that, for me, is a surprise. As a software engineer, this is back to the physical computing thing. It turns out the thing that resonates with kids today is doing stuff in the real world. Obviously, we don't have over in the US. You've got, you've got First Robotics. You've got some of these amazing contests that kids can. Kids can engage in. We don't have so much of that in the UK because we don't really have that kind of science fair culture you guys have. But it is still the case that if you give kids a programmable platform that can do physical computing, just a light bulb goes off for a lot of them. Not all of them, but for a lot of them.
Well, and there's a lot of people right now too that really, really enjoy the retro gaming that the Raspberry can be made to do, and I believe that a lot of children are getting back into, retro gaming and stuff like, it's not retro, but Minecraft, for instance. Minecraft's available on the
feels
Raspberry.
a bit, it has a retro feel, even if it isn't retro.
That's kind of, to me, that's sort of the bait, especially for younger children. And it certainly would have been for me. I mean, I bet you I weighed 150 pounds in high school because I skipped every lunch break to go sit there and program in BASIC, making my little text-based MUDs and stuff for my friends. Yeah. So I know where you're coming from, definitely.
And that's great, right? That's like it's kids like secret knowledge, right? They like the fact that actually we benefit from the fact that their elders don't always know about this stuff. Because I remember, when I was a kid, if you could, kids were always the ones who could program the video cassette recorder, so they set the time on the VCR. So that it didn't just say 8888, I can do that. My parents can't do it. And so there's, kids love to know how stuff works underneath. And we always worried, when we started Raspberry Pi, is it the kids don't care anymore? Is it the kids, they just want to go on Facebook, right? Or they just want to play games. But it turns out, no. It's like kids want to understand how the world around them works. We took a Raspberry Pi. I thought we were going to have to put a Raspberry Pi in a beautiful case for kids to be interested in it. I took a Raspberry Pi, and just before we launched, I took a Raspberry Pi into a school in Cambridgeshire. The kids, the number one thing the kids loved about it, apart from the fact they could program it, was you could see the green PCB. You could see, because normally you have to, unless you drop your phone on the floor and smash it, you're not going to see what's in it. Yeah. And they loved the fact that it's like, is that all? Is that it? It's like, but where's the computer? I'm like, that is the computer. And they're like, no, but where's the computer though? And there's actually a great thing that happens. There's some great research in this that shows that if a kid programs with a modern computer that's very polished and shiny, they kind of feel that even if it isn't helping them, they feel the computer has somehow helped them, that somehow they don't deserve all the credit, that some of the credit has come from the computer. If they have a Raspberry Pi where they can see that's all it is, and they can make that do something, it's actually more feels like, even though it's the same amount of achievement, it feels like more achievement because it feels raw. It feels more raw and exposed, and just it feels like it must have been them because it can't have been that.
And I feel like, expanding on that, I feel like you're more introverted children. Imagining that this is a whole world right here.
Yeah.
That everything from your thoughts, your work in programming, to games you enjoy, all can be summed up in something that can go into, a matchbox pretty much. And it's just, we hadn't seen anything like that in our lifetime yet that we could touch financially that would also be practical for everyday use. But if you had to say, off the top of your head, how many what share of the market would you say are industrial users?
I'd say it's about half. So it's interesting because now's a really interesting time to ask that question, because usually it's hard to answer, right? Because we don't go around doing surveys on our customers and stuff. But it's a Raspberry Pi 4 was launched about a year ago. Industrial customers tend to stick with what they know, and they take a long time to adopt a new product. Consumers are the opposite. Consumers, the day after a new product comes out, the day after your iPhone N comes out, can't buy. Who wants to buy the N-1, right? So you see that split. And right now, over time, industrial people, they're starting to adopt Raspberry Pi 4, but the vast majority of Raspberry Pi 4 sales are consumer, and the vast majority of Raspberry Pi 3 sales are industrial. And what we see right now is almost exactly a 50-50 split between those two platforms. So I think it's 50-50. Which is it's interesting, right? It's grown. The industrial side has grown over time. It's taken people time to get comfortable with the idea. You go on our website, and it's got pictures of kids learning to program. It's got little cartoon robots and stuff. And so there's a natural there's part of people that wants to say, well, hey, this can't be real, right? This can't be a real industrial platform, And you get a lot of industrial. It's funny, you get a lot of industrial computer vendors. They make these kind of very kind of product briefs that are very polished and look very industrial, and they make all these claims about the how hard they work on making it industrial grade. I got to say, there's nothing more industrial grade than surviving in a kid's bedroom. Like, you make something that survive in a kid's bedroom, that's one of the most hostile environments on the planet. And the same things you do to make your thing survive being in a kid's bedroom, being shoved in a backpack and taken out 100 times, the exact same things you do in order to make a reliable product for consumers and particularly for children are the same things that will make this great if you stick it on an oil rig and use it to log data. And that's what people have come to realize over time, actually, that we are, and as much as anything else, actually volume leads to quality. So if you were, what makes me laugh about some of these industrial vendors is they're making 10,000 units a year, right? Right. I do not believe you can make a reliable product at 10,000 units a year. What generates quality is volume, because it gives you depth of data and it gives you depth of understanding of failure modes. We sell 6 this year, probably sell about 7 million Raspberry Pis. You put them out into the wild, and then you bother to listen when people say, "Yeah, my Raspberry Pi broke," and you say, "Okay, well, send it back to us, and we'll send it back to us. We'll send you a replacement. We'll have a look at it. We'll see what went wrong." And if you do that year in, year out for pretty much a decade now, what you end up with is a depth of understanding about what breaks computers that's completely inaccessible to somebody who makes 10,000 or something. If we make 10,000 or something, that's basically we turn the line on. That's what the kind of amount we make to check the line's working. What you mean. Yeah, you turn the line on, bang, 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 10,000 units come off. Oh, quickly turn the line off again. That's what 10,000 for us is we sell about, do the maths. Yeah, we sell about 20,000 units a day. So 10,000 units is kind of a morning's production. And that's how you build good electronics.
Well, and once again, the range of support from third parties grows as the distribution grows and as the problems start rolling in, so do the solutions. Yeah,
that's it. That's it. And we don't solve all the problems with we have to solve the hardware problems because we make the hardware. Software problems, I've had enormous support from the community around it. So, what changed after a few years, you talk about Linux. After a few years, what you find is if you type Linux questions into Google, what you get are Raspberry Pi answers. And that gives you an idea of what fraction of the Linux world is actually the Raspberry Pi world. And it's a lot of it. And that means that a lot of the talent in the Linux software development community is working on Raspberry Pi and solving problems on Raspberry Pi.
Oh, well, I'd buy somebody a steak dinner right now if they could show me a Linux magazine that doesn't mention Raspberry Pi at least 8 times. Yeah. I mean, it's now the two cultures are forever ingrained.
Yeah, and we try to be a good participant in that community, by not, it'll be very easy for us to put our prices up or, start to try and behave in unhelpful ways. And it's just what we got to recognize is that we're part of this community and we owe the community a debt. And so we spend a lot of money on subsidizing development of not just of things for our platform, but things that are generally useful. So, we spend a lot of money on, a recent example, libcamera, right? So people have always done camera stuff with Raspberry Pi. There we go. People have always done camera stuff with Raspberry Pi. One place we've been giving back recently is we've been investing in the development of Lowcountry, which is open source camera stack for modern open source camera stack for Linux. Obviously, those things do benefit us, but they benefit the entire community because they're kind of moving an entire subsystem forward. But hopefully, lots of other vendors, lots of other users will benefit from, not just us.
I gotcha. What's the most unusual use? Industrial, home use, any kind of anything that you've ever heard?
Well, the cucumber one's a bit. The cucumber one's that's well up there.
Should be your top 5.
Yeah, I mean you sort of think of some unusual environments they've been used in. They've overwintered in Antarctica. People, talk about the low power consumption. People stick them out there in Antarctica with a solar panel. And try and take pictures of penguins. Take pictures of penguins with Raspberry Pi is the big thing. So lots of wildlife conservation stuff. Lots of people using them in the developing world as for offline access to resources. So suppose you want to Suppose you're in a. There's actually a lot of client devices in the developing world. So you're in a village in Africa, and maybe you've got a mobile phone that's got the ability to display a simple web page. But all you have is basically cellular. You have low data rate cellular, so you have voice and you maybe have SMS. And so, but you want to access Wikipedia, or you want to access Khan Academy. We want to access any of the other vast number of very useful Project Gutenberg, these vast number of free high quality resources online. So you say, okay, how am I going to do that? Well, one thing you can do is those resources actually mostly will fit onto an SD card. So what you can do is you take all those resources, bake them onto an SD card, put a Raspberry Pi somewhere up high with a Wi-Fi antenna on it, and then people can connect to it as an access point and use their client devices to. So Raspberry Pis exist in developing world environments without screens, where they're just server devices to enable existing client devices to access more data. You also see them in developing world environments with screens attached. So you see people building, I want to build an internet cafe. What's the cheapest way to build an internet cafe in the developing world right now? Raspberry Pis. Row of Raspberry Pis, row of monitors, and power consumption is low, so you can run off a generator.
Right.
And they're very compact. They have no moving parts, so you don't need to worry about fans getting clogged. They get a lot of use in that environment. Honestly, the whole industrial use of Raspberry Pi, if you look back, we have to be honest with ourselves. If you look back, the whole industrial use of Raspberry Pi is a surprise to us. We didn't realize that we were building something of that level of quality when we first started out. And so that's always, I tend to go around and I look behind. When you see screens now, and it was a fun game to play, if you see screens out in the wild, always good fun to look behind them, how many of them have got Raspberry Pis driving them.
I definitely imagine so. And one thing that's kind of neat, too, that I know has just come out is the dual display. And that was another surprise there. But for gaming, and the fact you can have another display open for just communications, what have you. Oh, that totally just came out of the blue. We didn't expect to see that on the latest Raspberry. So,
yeah, that was a fun one. That was one I believed in a lot. It's down to being a PC, right? What can a PC do? It can drive two displays. You go into an office, people generally have two displays. Which actually came out originally of our interaction with Citrix. So got a very good relationship with Citrix, the team in Fort Lauderdale, and they did a port of their what they call receiver, their client software to Raspberry Pi.
Gotcha.
People using that in a commercial context for building thin clients. Raspberry Pi 3 makes a fantastic thin client. But the main piece of feedback they had to us is 80% of our customers will not buy a single display thin client, because 60% of customers actually want two displays. You think thin client use cases are maybe sometimes quite low end. So maybe you're in a call center for a bank. But if you think about like call center application in a bank, the person on the telephone, they want to have two screens. They want to have a screen for the product they're selling you. They want to have a screen for your account details. So even those things that you might describe as being low end use cases, often a dual display. So they said 60% of their customers are like that. Of the remaining 40%, half of them, they want the option. Even if they're only using a single display, they want the option to go to dual display in the future. So if you only have a single display, you can only address 20% of the market. And so when we were speccing, fortunately we got that insight early enough. When we were speccing Raspberry Pi for the silicon for Raspberry Pi 4, we said we've got to have two HDMI outputs. What's the compromise? The compromise is we've ended up having to use micro HDMI instead of full-size HDMI. A little bit of noise about that when we launched. Then actually what we did was we put a lot of effort, because people were concerned about the robustness of those little connectors. But what we did was when we launched, put a lot of effort into the robustness of the connector shell, so extra metal in the socket, to mean that actually in practice, people say, I might be able to pop that connector off the board. You try and don't, because you might break something. But you try and pop a connector off your board, you almost certainly destroy the cable before you can get that connector. It's got such deep teeth sunk into the board. You almost certainly destroy the cable before you manage to pull that connector off the board.
Well, I actually like the arrangement now because you've got a cable coming out, which if it's going to be damaged, it's going to be on that cable, not on the board itself, as you're saying. And for anyone who works in a computer lab, golly, an HDMI port was damaged.
Yeah.
is one heck of a bigger headache than just a simple cable to replace.
Yeah.
And the cables aren't expensive, you know.
Yeah, that's
and
it.
they're not widely available. You can get them at Best Buy. They sell them right next to where they sell the raspberries.
Yeah, that's
So
it.
it works out great. I don't think it's even considered a hiccup, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was
But
just one of those like launch day things where people said, "Oh, that's strange," but then over time, people have come to understand that some thought does go into these things. There's sometimes people think that we don't think, and we actually thought, and we thought a little bit about it. We had some robust discussions within the organization about connector choices, but it felt like the only way we could get Raspberry Pi is limited by the periphery of the board. You look around a Raspberry Pi, there's a connector or an aerial everywhere around the side of the board. So the only way we were ever going to get two display outputs on was to put them side by side and make them small.
Well, here's another question. As far as the guy that's seen it all, okay, how many raspberries have you seen in a stacked up, daisy chained together?
How many? I have seen in one installation, I've probably seen 1,000 Raspberry Pi.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, so there I saw some at Maker Faire, which has got to be about 1,000. They had an interesting kind of sculpture. These guys built a sculpture that, as the Raspberry Pis are used, the sculpture changes, so you can kind of visualize data flowing through. A thing people do a lot with Raspberry Pis, actually, I always have done, is to build models of supercomputers. Right? You're not going to build a supercomputer with a Raspberry Pi, a real high-performance supercomputer with Raspberry Pi, because the per node, even for a Raspberry Pi 4, the per node performance is not high enough for that to be an economic thing to do. But what you can build is a model of a supercomputer. And actually, there are customers in the defense industry, for example, who use Raspberry Pis to build a model, who have obviously large supercomputers for doing weapons research, and they build models of those devices using Raspberry Pis they used to train people on. So that's the thing. We know Oracle have built large Raspberry Pi supercomputers. Like I say, I've seen at Maker Faire people who've built supercomputers that have kind of physical movement of the devices as they compute. So you can, and it's quite nice because you can run some algorithms and you can actually see the flow of data through the system as these Raspberry Pis move in and out. Which is kind of fun.
Oh, that's got to be magic for you.
It is, right. It is. And I miss, it's a shame Maker Fairs aren't the thing anymore, because we used to have a lot of fun going around Maker Fairs, and you would just see the most incredible. I remember going around Maker Faire in New York in 2011, before we launched Raspberry Pi. And it was when we were getting ready to do Raspberry Pi. And we had kids with, there were kids there with Arduinos. Doing automation, and that was one of my first indications that kids really were going to be attached to this. Kids really were going to get excited about it. And then once we launched Raspberry Pi and started going back to Maker Faire, you'd see more and more and more people doing interesting stuff, and it was fantastic, and a lot of kids, which is
the robotic side of it is so impressive too, because almost every high school and middle school's got a robotics team now.
Yeah.
So here in the United States at least.
You guys are lucky. Don't underestimate how lucky you are in the US with your science culture and your that stuff. We have an air base near us in Cambridge, Lakenheath Air Force Base, with the 492nd are up there. And I've been up there to talk. And actually, it's one of the few places in the UK, because not really the UK, it's really a little bit of America.
Right.
It's one of the few places I can go talk at a school, even today, after we've made a lot of progress. One of the few places that I can really go and talk to an audience, shop class. If I go up there and talk to a shop class, it's one of the few places I go really talk about robotics and meet kids who are really into it and have been into it for years and years and years.
Well, I tell you what, it's something that is eye catching, because any child of any age sees a robot walking around. Okay, how do I get it?
Any age.
Right. There you go.
Child of any age, 42-year-old child.
How do I get it? How do I get it? Make it. How do I make it do what I need it to do or want it to do? And, I guess in the early 2000s, you had like a big run on robots, like robot kits. Remember, you had to show BattleBots, everybody liked that. And,
yeah.
And that sort of thing. And I think that sort of tilled the ground, so to speak, for people going, okay, you know what? These guys are building robots. Maybe I can. They buy a kit. Next thing they know, they're like, hey, let's get into something even more homebrew. And then here comes your product, just a couple of years after that was kind of dying down and stoked it all back up again.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and we have a thing called Pi Wars. There's an event every year in Cambridge called Pi Wars. People come from all over the world, and it's exactly that. It's battle bots, but built with on a little bit of a smaller scale, but built with Raspberry Pis. And these things, they trundle around. They got to solve various challenges. They got to fight each other. There's this lovely game where you have a robot and it has a balloon and it has a pin, and then on a stick. And then the robots, you put two of them in an arena, and they're kind of going around each other, trying to get their pin to pop the other guy's balloon before he can pop their balloon. And of course, they're both pointing at each other, so sometimes they run at each other and they both pop each other's balloons at the same time. But it's great, right? And you see people doing some really, we had obviously we didn't have one this year, unfortunately. It was cancelled because it was the end of March. But last year I remember going, and they had people over from the US, people from Malaysia. We met some people from Malaysia, and they'd all flown to Cambridge to have this experience of fighting each other with their Raspberry Pi robots.
Well, that's a lot less heartbreaking than watching robots destroy each other.
Yeah, that's it.
I
remember those shows, right? I mean, I remember there was a wonderful thing where they. I remember the first disc robot that was on there, where there was a one day somebody realised, certainly in the UK, on the UK one, that there are limits to how much you can't have a hardened blade, because they worry it'll shatter and then hurt spectators. And so there's kind of a limit to how much power you can put into the system, with pneumatics or stuff. And so there was somebody realized that the best way to store energy was to have a big heavy disc and spin it. Have a motor that gradually spins this disc up, and then have like a chunk of metal on the end of that disc, and you push it into the other robot, and there's so much energy in that it catches on the robot and rips it apart. I remember there was a robot called Hypnodisc. I must have been
Gotcha.
I was watching this on television, and this robot, this idiot-looking robot, little cart with this spinning disc on the front, and it trundled into the arena, and everyone laughed. But I was this ridiculous-looking robot, and it just drove up to the other robot and ripped it into pieces. And then the next year, pretty much every robot was a disc robot. And it's that kind of thing where, that stuff gets people excited, I think, about engineering and technology, and that's wonderful.
And that's really, once again, we're people who in some ways, we're trying to push the best ice cold water in the middle of a mountain lake, and that's a challenge. And I can especially see it for someone in your side of the industry, but it's a challenge that's been met and overcome. Yeah. I mean, once again, like I said, I hadn't felt this way since I walked in my first computer lab. Yeah. And that's a feeling that, all of my colleagues get as well. And it's something because, no matter what side of the industry you're on, you can sit down and talk Raspberry to people. In fact, I hardly ever work third party, but one of the few times I went and did an interview, it was a kind of a, it's going like an interview normally goes. And we started talking about raspberries. This is back when the 3 was out. And we talked about raspberries for the rest of the time. That was it. And there was no question if I had the job or not. It was like, oh, yeah, of course. Come on. Yeah. And,
Yeah. It's there's that thing where it's just like it gives people a platform of all ages, a platform to talk about the things that they find interesting. I mean, you look at kind of back to like our original idea. You mentioned interviews. Back to our original idea about how do you get kids excited about computing. It isn't just about how do you get them excited about computing. It's how do you give the institution, how do you give the university a chance to discriminate between the ones who know what they're doing and the ones that don't. And if when we were in this era where nobody was really doing any programming, not only did not many people come to us, but the people who came to us, it's very hard to tell the difference between the ones who really knew what they were doing and the ones who didn't. As soon as you give everyone a common platform that they're using to learn about this stuff, you can say, hey, what do you do with your Raspberry Pi? And you can give them out because they're so cheap. You can give them out at an open day, and then 6 months later you can say, hey, what did you do with that computer we gave you? And the ones who say nothing, well, you probably don't want to let them in to study computer science. And then the ones who did do something, well, they'll have something they can talk about. And, maybe some of these kids, they're a little bit shy. Maybe they're not always the, some of them are, but they're not always the we were all shy when we were teenagers.
Oh, yeah.
You give it gives them something they can talk about, and particularly, a thing we worry a lot about in interviews is we have people from private schools and we have people from public schools, and often the ones from private schools, they've been trained pretty aggressively to do well in interviews. And the ones from a public school like I went to, maybe it's the first time we've been in that environment. It's like, sit down. You got half an hour, perform well, and you get to come to Cambridge. Don't perform well, and you go somewhere else. And the nice thing about giving people a technical platform is it reduces the advantage of training. It means that, it reduces, fundamentally, if you've got a kid who's gone to a school that isn't very good at getting people into Cambridge, if they've got something technical they can talk about and they can be talking about it convincingly, they're going to win out over the bluffer. You can't bluff. That's what I love about engineering. Right, lots of other things you can bluff in. Engineering, you write a computer program, it crashes or it runs. You build a bridge, it stands or it falls. Right? I love technical subjects because they give kids from disadvantaged backgrounds a way to discriminate, a way to get ahead, even if maybe they don't have that layer of polish they would have got maybe if they come from a little bit of a tonier background.
Well, and it's so hard. It's not so hard, but it's so rare. You see the price point meet with the platform in a way that this does. I don't know any child out there whose caregivers couldn't afford $35 for a computer.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember, there's probably people still paying off some of the computers from the 90s.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it was nothing to spend $2,000. And,
there was an era where PCs in the UK, they used to cost £1,000. That was like, you could not, for love of money. I remember I bought a computer when I was an undergraduate. I was a first-year undergraduate at Cambridge. I bought a PC for £940, and I felt I'd done really. It was a Pentium 133 with 16 meg of RAM, I think, and I felt I'd done really damn well. And it had the littlest kind of 14-inch monitor, and I thought I'd done damn well to get that for £940 in 1990s money, which is probably a couple of grand these days.
Oh yeah, I think my first hard hitting computer was. Do you remember Cyrix?
I do.
Yeah.
586. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it was. I think it ran at 166 megahertz. It called it a 200. Saying that it moved like a 200 megahertz.
Like a 200. They were the kings of the creative model numbering. Yeah.
$3,000, my man. $3,000. I think it was. My payment on that was bigger than my car payment.
Yeah, and, right.
Oh man, I didn't know. I mean, that was great. Back in the day.
They're good machines.
Then I started like figuring out. Okay, you know what? I could just go buy a board, pick up a hard drive, and slowly put it together for a fraction of the cost. And I think that's one reason people get into hardware too. Is trying to cut corners at first, maybe, just to get into something, to get their feet off the ground. I'm more of a hardware person than programming. And that's where I got into hardware, was just trying to scrap together something that I could own and still pay rent.
Yeah, that's it. And I know, it's interesting. I mean, we still acknowledge the importance of that high end of the PC industry. And you're not going to be playing your cutting edge computer game on a Raspberry Pi ever, because that's not who we are. And maybe you're not going to be running your high end CAD package on Raspberry Pi. All we want is we always say all we want is 80% market share. All we want is the mainstream. But that high end is very important as well. So we publish a magazine called, we acquired a magazine called Custom PC. Which is, I think, a little bit like Maximum PC. I think you have a magazine. Is it Maximum PC in the US? Yeah. It's the UK equivalent of Maximum PC. And it's very much for those people. It's for the modders. It's for the people who want to build absolutely the best PC. And so we went out the opportunity to acquire that from its publisher came up. We publish a number of other magazines, and we're like, we have to have this because we have to be able to speak to that community as well. And we're not going to sell them Raspberry Pis, but what we did was we took the magazine and if you look at like Anantech, we're very inspired by Anantech. They do really good journalism where when a new Intel processor comes out, or a new ARM processor, or a new GPU comes out, they do a deep dive and they kind of help you understand how it works. And so what we did with Custom PC, we bought it and we put some more investment into it. And we said, well, the budget used to only run to one feature length article a month. What we said was, well, let's put 2 feature length articles in, and we'll still have that one feature length article which is for consuming computers. But what we'll do is we'll do a how it works article. So we'll do a feature which is a deep dive, like an Anantech type of thing. And that's been super popular with our customer base, actually, because what we're saying is, okay, you've got into building your own PC. Let's have a little think about if we can elevate your understanding a little bit, help you understand what's actually going on. You're not just bolting things together, you're understanding how they bolt together work.
Well, the thing is, too, trying to compete with the gaming market, you not only compete with other gaming PCs, you're also competing with the PlayStation, Xbox One, and, where does that go? So, I'd say if I had to make my choice, I would definitely pick just the flexibility, the expandability of the Raspberry platform if that was going to be the side of the industry I had to choose. Yeah. So, but
we want to speak to everyone. We want to have a message for everyone, right? We want to speak to everyone. We want to have a message for everyone. We want to try to educate and elevate everybody, regardless of which bit of the industry they want to be in.
Well, I tell you what, I've seen a lot of like RetroPie, for instance, and I know just everybody likes that sort of stuff. All the old emulators because of the nostalgia. But you know what? If there's anybody out there listening, if somebody would come up with a Raspberry Pi box that just ran 90s computer games, that would be nice. All the old good 90s and even early 2000s, like, for instance, Half-Life, all the classics, Age of Empire, and just get nothing but all the Game of the Year type games. That would be something. I'm sure somebody's stopping what they're doing and getting to work on that right now.
That's it. We talked to somebody once in the Korean market about, StarCraft is very popular in the Korean market. And we did talk to somebody once about, could you use Raspberry Pi to make a machine that just plays StarCraft? Classic Star, not StarCraft 2, classic StarCraft, the one that's beloved. Yeah. And we never came to anything, but I've always thought, the StarCraft box would be a fun thing to build.
Oh, yeah, the Command and Conquer stuff.
Yeah.
Needless to say, I'm sure somebody could get together and put, like a wine type thing and get it going. And but that would be, I feel like that would be a really neat thing to have, and all that for all of us who, missed that era when everybody could get together on a LAN, instead of everything now is you go to a server, everybody meets there, and blah blah blah, and that sort of thing. But I tell you what, it has been great talking to you, and I really appreciate the interview. We all do here at Lowcountry Stories. And do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so. All I want to do is just get across to people the extent of the revolution that has happened. Not just us, right? We went to a very bad place in our industry about a decade ago. But we were on a trajectory that was going to take us to not having a technology industry. Right, and kind of nobody cared, and certainly nobody in government cared. Very few people in the industry cared. And what's happened over the last decade in the UK, and we've seen it in the US, and we've seen it elsewhere, is a really wonderful example of how a community of people who are like-minded and have a vision and a mission can come together and can solve a problem. And it's just been so heartening to be part. I would wish this for anyone, to once in your lifetime be part of a situation where people have come together and solved a serious problem like this. Our applicant numbers at Cambridge are great. We're seeing this feed through into industry now. We're seeing people, I have people working for me at Raspberry Pi who learned to program as children on Raspberry Pis. It's a closed loop. And that's just what I want to get across to people, how enjoyable it's been for me to be part of this, and how this particular fight is a never-ending fight, and we hope that other people will engage with it, but that there are other fights like this out there, and that people, if you want to do one thing with your life, like I cook, I cannot overstate what a transformative experience this has been for me personally. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
Definitely. And folks at home, I tell you right now, you've just heard from a man who's changed the world for the better. You don't often hear from that. You often hear the claim, but you rarely ever see the result. And the result has been acres and acres, as far as the eye can see, of fruit and raspberries.
Raspberries, that's it.
And we sure do appreciate it.